Welcome to episode 24 of the Acknowledge Action Podcast. I am your host, Matthew Benko. In this episode, I'm joined by Kevin Brewer, who shares his powerful journey from military service to personal growth. Together, we dive into the challenges he faced with health issues and the transformative power of radical acceptance. Kevin opens up about his military background, how his military background shaped his leadership style, the importance of asking the right questions, and the mental resilience needed to navigate life's obstacles. We also explore the mind-body connection, emotional intelligence, and the role of curiosity in uncovering solutions and fostering self-discovery. This episode is packed with insights on redefining wealth, transforming limiting beliefs, and embracing emotions as tools for growth. Whether you're seeking balance, personal growth, or a fresh perspective, Kevin's story offers great inspiration. Let's get going. Kevin, thank you so much for being here today on the Acknowledge Action Podcast.
Yeah, man. Hey, thanks for having me out.
This is good. We connected last week to introduce ourselves to each other and just kind of get a feel of what we want to talk about. And here we are hitting the ground running. You got a great story to tell. Really interesting to peel the layers back on some of the things we talked about.
Yeah.
So I always kick off the show with Acknowledge Action to get our conversation going. We talk about your military service and how it's motivated you, what motivated you to get into the service, what your experience was like, and where you're at now with everything.
Yeah, actually, I was talking to somebody the other day about this. So my dad was in the Navy, which didn't actually prompt me to go to the Navy. That's where I ended up going, but it wasn't the precipice for it. Him and I actually had a really bad relationship growing up. But he was kind of a lot of alcoholism in front of family and stuff like that. So him and I had a really bad relationship. We just didn't really get along too much when I was younger. Afterwards, the last couple of years before he passed away, we got closer again. But that's a different story. But yeah, so I was actually planning on I didn't really know what I was going to do after high school and everything. Like college wasn't really a thing for me. I was tired of school. I hated school. I didn't really like the process of schooling. I like learning education. I like to dive into things and really get deep into things. But I don't like the way school does it. So I always knew it wasn't really going to be my path. And 1 year after between my junior and senior year, a buddy of mine just goes, "Hey, I just signed up for the Navy. You want to go with me?" And I was like, "Sure."
Yeah.
I just yeah. So the recruiter came and took the test and, the ASVAB or whatever, and signed up for a job and went to the Navy. After my senior year, I did a delayed entry program, but yeah, after high school, went to the Navy. So.
Oh, that's interesting how you so sometimes it's like a proactive acknowledgement. You get this line of sight and you get real dialed in for a major life decision. It's more like, hey, yeah, this is cool. Yeah. And it's a game changer in a good way. I think a lot of veterans, I've talked to a lot of veterans over the years and reflecting on my own experience, it was kind of like that too. It was like, yeah, sure. Well, why not? But then from there, it just kind of, you tap into this amazing network that you don't even know what's to come after that.
Yeah.
How it follows. Well, what follows your years of service?
Yeah. I do appreciate my time in the service. I see, not that I didn't necessarily have that foresight of saying I want to go to the service, but I always kind of knew I wanted to I liked serving people and helping and being that person. So it kind of fit anyway. A lot of military people in my family too. So it probably was in the back of my mind. I just didn't necessarily realize it. But my little brother he's in the Navy now, actually. He's a corpsman. He was driven more for that purpose, because my dad's service. And then, of course, he came out to when I was in Hawaii. He came visiting me, and he's kind of was like, "No, I want to do it." So he actually recognized really early he was going to go in, and he's serving now. So
that's pretty cool. I know we're recording the day after the Army-Navy game, so I'm sure all the Navy, all the Navy fans and all the Navy alum, are pretty happy with yesterday's outcome.
The ranked Army team, huh?
Yeah. It's nice. It's cool to see that rivalry and all that. But what's really cool, what you said, is how we could influence friends, family members, based off our experience. You know, sometimes good, sometimes bad, sometimes a little bit in between, right?
Yeah.
As far as that, so you were stationed at Hawaii at the time, and your brother visited you and experienced it here. That's a very common theme with veterans enjoying the service. It's well, a family member did it, and it prompts you to really
Yeah.
consider it at the very minimum
Mm.
to see if it's an option. Because I know how I was when I was 17, 18. I wasn't ready for college. It
Yeah.
wasn't, I didn't have the ability. I wasn't dialed in. I just wasn't focused. And
Yeah.
going into the service was a great means to just kind of give me that 4 or 5 years I needed to straighten things out and
Yeah.
really get dialed in and get focused. I got to give my hats off to these young men and women out of high school who are extremely dialed in at 15, 16,
Yeah.
17. You know, even like yesterday's game, the Army Navy, that was like the academies, right? What it takes to get into those academies is just it's pretty amazing. As a 15, 16 year old. But anyway, I digress a little bit.
No, yeah, you're good.
It's very it's very influential. I always find it very interesting how and why individuals choose the military. Sometimes it chooses us. Sometimes it's like in your brother's case, you know, they're several years out and
Yeah.
they get on that path and stay on that path.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the academies are actually really hard to get into too. But just to piggyback on that point, it is extremely hard. Like people with like, I think there's actually a rule you can't have dependents. So like people with kids, even like it's like I don't think they're allowed to get in. So there's like a lot of extra little rules, and just those first like couple of years and everything is like brutal on them mentally. So it's a tough place to go. So hats off to those
Yeah.
guys who can do it.
Yeah. So when we talked a couple of weeks ago, we talked about how we got connected, right? And how the podcast here and what acknowledged action stands for. It jumped out to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about some things, and I know we're gonna have a great conversation here to talk about that. So let's jump into that. Talk a little bit about what what you want to talk about and some of the things, you know, how your military experience shaped you, influenced you, and since you've been out, what you've been dealing with and how you've been dealing with the transition and some of the things you've been dealing with personally, professionally, what transition means to you and those key topics that we talked about a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, so kind of reference a little bit. My dad and I had a really bad relationship growing up. So when I went to the military, I thought I hate this guy. Like it just wasn't going to work out between him and I didn't want to see him again. And then shortly after I got in the military, I started realizing I was like, well, hate's kind of a strong word. If I really don't like the guy, then why am I going to give him time of day in my mind? Like, it doesn't really make sense to
Yeah.
give him that space in my mind. So I kind of like moved off white, said, hey, you know what, whatever. Like, if I see him, I'll see him. I'll say hi, I'll be cordial, whatever. I want to go see my mom. Obviously, they were still together at the time. And so I'll just kind of play it like that. And, I don't need to be a dick, whatever. I don't need him that capacity in my life anymore. So it doesn't really matter. And then I started noticing that, you know what, he had a tough childhood. His dad, from what his dad died when he was, I think, 15 in a car wreck. And from what all the counts is that, if the guy was ever sober, it's because he drank himself that way. And apparently he was very, very brutal. Just not a nice, very good to the kids. Again, this is secondhand. I don't know for sure, but I never really talked to him too much about it. But just for all accounts, it wasn't very good. So I realized, well, he did better than his dad. So there's something there. And then I started paying attention more. It's going, well, a lot of people in the community go to him. He does a lot for the community, and he seems to help out a lot of people. Maybe he just didn't exactly know how to be a dad. None of us really know how to be parents at the end of the day, right? Like we're doing it for the first time too,
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
have maybe these habits that somebody else showed us, and and we're trying to make them better. But we're stuck in that mentality a little bit. Where if we don't have some dedicated mental skills, training, we just kind of wing it, right? So I started realizing that he's not a bad person. We just had a bad experience. So there's actually no reason for me to dislike him. Again, I don't need him in that capacity anymore. Why can't I just see him as a person and go from
Yeah.
there? So that's kind of how I started that process a little bit. And then, throughout the military, the same kind of thing where it's like I started realizing like most people who had problems in the military, it wasn't because they were bad sailors, soldiers, whatever. It's because they were just confused. They had bad habits. They, had all these different things that nobody really tried to help them with, and nobody really tried to understand. And people are trying to treat them how they were, not how they could be. So I always sought these leadership positions and get ranking up because I knew I could do it better than a lot of the people that are ahead of me. And I learned from the people that I actually respected and thought did a good job. And then the other ones I just took and said, hey, again, kind of even with my dad, is like, I didn't hang on the things that were negative. I said, well, what can I learn from this? Like, whether it's negative or positive, it's irrelevant. We put that weight on it ourselves. What can I learn from this experience? And how can I improve upon the process? So that's kind of how I just kind of did everything. And I was like, well, you know what? I need to get to this position, not because I need the power, but because I know I can do it better than the person doing it right now. Or once this guy leaves, they're going to need somebody else to fill that spot and do it as good as they did, or improve upon it even then. So that was always my drive and motivation. And I always had pretty good success, when I got in those positions because of that. Now, I didn't have these skills that we talked about later, that I learned later on. And if I would have, it would have been even better. And, but, you learn as you go. So that was always my drive and my motivation in the military. But what I didn't know, and we'll get into this, is that a lot of my personal coping mechanisms and stuff and the way I dealt with things was physical, doing things in the physical realm, like in sports, being, working out, things like that. But eventually, when and later in portion of my military career, then afterwards, my health started to fail, and I didn't have a way out because my physicality was always my way to overcome things and deal with difficulties in life, and then move past them and process them and do those things. So I didn't have a really good way of doing that. So later on, I started having more and more issues like these other, like these people I was helping out, early on, because I didn't have a way of processing it, and I didn't have a guide at that point teaching me how to overcome things and deal with things in the moment, especially outside of the physical realm. So I had no mental skills per se. I was always an intelligent person, but I didn't have the mental skills to adapt and overcome when my physical skills, failed me. But
when did you actively acknowledge that? When did that, I'll say it like this, when did that make sense to you? What you just said, because that's pretty powerful how you had to almost pivot from being a very coping things physically, whether it's through exercise, sports, all that stuff, right? All those healthy physical outlets we have. And then when that comes to almost sometimes what feels like an immediate stop,
yeah,
you have to do a pivot to like, now what? And then that's a whole nother subset of challenges. And really the driving force behind acknowledge to action is really, you got to acknowledge it for what it is. So when did that become very clear to you? And
yeah,
how did you manage that?
yeah. So that was probably only about, let's say it was 2024. About four. It was actually right before COVID, or right around COVID, when it
Okay.
first hit. It was like when it really completely sank in for me. So just to kind of backtrack just a second, is right as I was getting on my way back from Afghanistan, because I did tour a year in Afghanistan. I got a swine flu or something, got real sick that way. I ended up getting like a couple of hernias. I had like a complete sinus infection, so my whole left side was filled up. My right side was half filled with infection. And I was born with psoriasis. I had a bunch of other medical, like kind of long term issues that kind of was in the background. And when I was in Afghanistan, you're eating real clean. There's only not much you can eat. Basically eating chicken and salad all day, right? So that's
Yeah.
about all you got. So you're eating pretty clean. And I get back, and of course, then you start eating all the other crap that was doing whatever. And I had all those infections. I had, it was kind of coming back from the swine flu or whatever it was that time around. And then I was on like a long-term antibiotic. I had the surgery for my hernias and all that kind of stuff. And all of those things have components that damage ligaments and tendons, and I didn't know that. And I was in the weight room, I was lifting, and I felt something kind of pop up here. And instead of doing the smart thing and stopping and making sure I went and played basketball, and and they ended up like creating a worse problem. But I didn't know what was going on, and nobody else could figure it out. So for the next 13 years, I just kept having all kinds of like heart rate issues and stuff. My heart would get stuck. I had like chest pain, down my arm and my back, on my neck, all this kind of stuff. Eventually, my face started going up. All this kind of really random things. It's getting migraines constantly. A lot of neurologic issues, like all over my body. Nerve pain, numbness, tingling, everything. But it was so disparate that doctors didn't believe any of it was connected. So for 13 years, I was really just getting pushed around doctor to doctor. Excuse me. Getting no help, really. There's only a handful of them that actually gave a shit at all. And most of them just be like, oh, it happened, shortly after you got back from Afghanistan, so it must be PTSD. And they would just throw you off and be like, oh, it's just PTSD. It's just PTSD. It's anxiety. It's all this stuff. It's like, well.
It was just glossed over. It wasn't getting to the core of the issue. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they'll give you a bunch of these medications, but the medications just cover up symptoms, right? They're not really treating the problem. And the problem with that is then whatever's underlying never gets fixed. But the medications, especially the longer you're on them, create other problems. So then you're dealing with those problems and those symptoms, and then just starts compounding and eventually just gets stuck in the cycle. So eventually I got to a point where I was completely unfunctional. And right before COVID, it actually was a positive for me. I was able to stay home and get paid, because right before that happened, I went to my boss. I said I was having daily panic attacks, multiple panic attacks a day. By the time I get to work, I was in so much pain and going through a panic attacks. I just couldn't function. Mm-hmm. I was on like constantly on a heating pad, multiple ice packs, the TENS stimulators or whatever, all that stuff I had going on constantly. I couldn't stop it. And it was just tearing me apart. Like I just couldn't function. And so during COVID, it kind of was able to stay home, and I started going, man, I cannot continue this. And I had come across some of the mental skills training, like performance psychology stuff, when I was coaching baseball and softball, youth baseball and softball with my kids the last few years before that. But it didn't really like dawn on me on how to use it myself. It was more for just like, oh, this is just for sports performance, because that's kind of how I came across it. Well, then I started just like saying, you know what, let me just dive into this. Like I have nothing else. Like, let me just dive into this. And I started going like, well, by this time I was really overweight. I was over 240 pounds. I was coming up on size 50 waist for my pants. And I was like, I just cannot continue this. I was like, so good, diving into the sports psychology stuff, with Brian Kane, Jocko Willink, David Goggins, all those kind of guys. And I said, well, I can control my weight, even if I can't work out. I can control the way how I consume food, when I consume those things.
Yeah.
I apologize if you can hear my dogs are going crazy.
It's okay. But that gives me an idea. You acknowledge that you can control your input sources, your food, and stuff that you physically we need. So okay.
Yep. Yeah. So, and that was kind of where it dawned on me, is like kind of a radical acceptance, as you call it, knowledge, right? Like radical acceptance of my circumstance. Well, yeah, I can't control the pain right now.
I like that.
I don't know what it
is. Radical acceptance. I like that.
Yeah. So I can't control the pain. I can't control what's going on, because we don't know what the problem is. But what I can control is my dietary intake. And I can get my weight under control, which might help out with some of these other symptoms, right? And so I started there. Ended up losing, in totality, 90 pounds. I've gained some of it back just through muscle. Actually, it's not fat gain, just because I've been able to work out the last couple of years because of my treatments. But but I was on a ton of rheumatologic medications and everything. I was able to drop all the medications. I got my weight under control, got my health under control, and that helped out a lot. Now, the pain and other symptoms were still there because I hadn't figured out the problem. But now I'm in more control of my thoughts, right? So whenever the anxiety and the panic sets in, I have these modes and these practices I could do, so I can set into to go, okay, well, let me control that a little bit. Like, instead of going like, okay, this panic attack's going to take me and set me in the emergency room, let me take a couple deep breaths and go, okay, like, is it just panic? Am I going from pain and then accelerating it? or is there something else going on? So I started asking myself like these questions, like literally saying like, is this worse than I've ever been? Was I doing something that typically happens that sets us off? If the answers are always yes, and I go, okay, let me take a couple seconds, let me take my breath, let me concentrate and focus on it and see if it dies down a little bit. So I was able to kind of start getting under control there. And there was another incident too where I was actually in my closet, and this is actually kind of important. I was having another one of these episodes, and I was like, screw it. I'm just going to sit here and die. I don't really care. I'm not going to go to the hospital. I'm not going to tell anybody. And then I was like, I'm not a particularly religious person. I believe there's something else, going on. There's a bigger picture out there. I don't know exactly what it is myself, but I said, God, I don't know how this works. I don't do this very much. I don't, especially for the last couple of years. But if I survive this, if you let me live through this, I'll figure out what's going on, and I'll help other people. So of course I lived through it, and that's kind of like, again, one of the things that perpetuated all this. So I just started, tapping in and going, again, radical acceptance. All right, well, what can I do? Well, doctors aren't helping me. I'm an analyst by trade. I don't know how to read MRIs, but I know there's something in there. I know there's something physical. It's not, we've tried all the medications, we've tried all this other bullshit, and it doesn't work. I know there's something physical going on. I just need to figure it out. So I started going through my MRIs and say, okay, I don't know how to read it, but again, I'm an analyst. I can look at two things and say whether or not, they are the same. So I just go online, I'd look at different images online, see what things will look like when they were quote unquote normal or supposed to look like. And I'd go through mine and I'd find some things that like looked out of place. And I would just get on like Reddit. There's a subreddit called Ask Docs, DOCS, where doctors and stuff can like kind of anonymously, respond to you or whatever. So they're not like, medically,
a little liable, all that.
Yeah. So I got a bunch of questions that way. I just go on there and say, hey, I just saw this in MRI. Can you guys help me out this or whatever? And I just started going through things, and again, being an analyst, I said, all right, let me find some things like diagnoses that could potentially fit, different things that cause different types of pain, symptoms and stuff where I am. And I would just go again, all right, let me find reasons that it could be it. Let me find reasons it's not it. And whichever one's stronger, I would go and ask about, it's like, hey, I got enough, not enough strength. If there was enough strength in it could be this, I'd go and ask doctor. If there was enough strength to say no, it's that, I would dismiss it, right? So I was able to go through a lot of stuff that way and not bug the doctors. Because again, that causes a whole nother problem of they're like, oh, then it's like cycle of like, oh, so you're just anxious, you're this, you're that. And it's like, okay, no, I'm just trying to figure out what's going on because you're not helping,
Yeah.
So I ended up finding out what was going on, figuring out myself after getting an argument with the doctor at Johns Hopkins and all this other stuff, different doctors that weren't helping me. So I figured out what's going on, found this doctor in Colorado. So really what it was cervical instability. So basically the ligaments that hold the skull onto the neck were too loose, and I had other segments in my neck and then a bunch of stuff in my thoracic. They were either too stiff or too loose. That's causing all kinds of nerve issues, right? So then obviously the higher up it goes, the more nerves are affected. So then you have all these disparate symptoms that don't seem to add up, but it makes sense because again, you're at your brainstem level, which it can basically mean any nerve in your body is affected. So I got to the doctor in Colorado, got a bunch of stem cell treatments, and I've gone from basically not being able to go from the couch to the fridge to now doing a bunch of Spartan races. And again, that started with your knowledge, right? Your knowledge and actions. Hey, radical acceptance of my situation. What can I control? Let me start there. And then let me start putting these in these incremental habits to start changing to get to a point where it's like, okay, well, they're here. Hey, when I first started, it was like I was trying to walk 200 meters, like literally like 200 meters. That's not that far. It took me half an hour or longer.
It was that intense for you. It was that you were that compromised, limited.
Yep. Yeah.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Well, I'd like to share a quick story that is the intent is to have some relevance, and it just happened last night. Mm-hmm. I'm going for a walk with my son and my dog, and there's a decent full moon out, right? Or close to it. I don't know what phase of the moon it was, but enough to like, wow, that's pretty cool looking moon, right? And my son, who's 6, Teddy, he was like, yeah, the Earth has 3 moons. Because we were looking at, I don't know if it was the North Star, but it was a beautiful sky. Long story short, it prompted conversation. I was like, no, actually, the Earth has 1 moon, but there are other planets in the solar system that have multiple moons. And that prompted a conversation. And what we talked about then Because then the kids are amazing. Why don't we ask Google to see what, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, that's almost the majority of the population does that now, arguably, who has access. And my point in sharing this is the goal, when you learn how to ask the right questions with the information you have, that's what's going to help you get to the source of the information.
Yeah.
And I share that with you because then what we did was like, hey, how many moons does, because then, and instead of making a statement, you ask it in the form of a question. How many moons does the Earth have?
Mm-hmm.
How many? And what we discovered, and what he was logically deducing to, is Mars has 2 moons, Earth has 1 moon. So he said in cycle, because he was saying in cycle, like there's 3 moons. So between Mars and Earth, there are 3 moons. And then we found out Jupiter has like 80 some moons.
Really? I didn't know
I
that.
share that. Yeah, it's really, I just love these profound conversations you have with young, well, especially when they're your kids. You're like, wow, like it was a great but the takeaway from that is learning how to ask the right questions, when and how and where.
Yeah.
And what you shared, Kevin, was just kind of like learning that 13 years like you went through of trying to figure it out, with the source of the pain through radical acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
That started the process of, okay, I acknowledge the input source, what I have control over, and then you're able to equip yourself. I'll say fill your life hack toolbox with asking the right questions,
Yeah.
and then getting you connected to that doctor in Colorado, and then from there, your quality of life went through. So that was the point of that
Yeah.
sidebar conversation there. Just to how important it is, and that takes experience. That takes being in the trenches of whatever it is that we're going through, and in inventorying our situation and analyzing. Okay, ask those internal self questions, so then they become those solution focused, hopefully ideally result oriented questions that
Yeah.
that come back to us and in a beneficial way, in a helpful way.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good point because it is about that, and just asking the right questions. And I talk about this all the time. Just curiosity is like if you're not asking a
Yeah,
question,
yeah.
if you're not asking questions, if you're not allowed to ask why, a lot of people that's why they don't feel qualified or justified, I should say, in talking to their doctors and questioning their doctors because they've been told all their life that hey, don't question authority. It's like if you told your kid you could never ask me why, or make a statement and not be able to defend it, right? Like then eventually he gets beaten down enough where he's like, hey, I can't ask an authority figure anything. I can't question anything they say. I just got to do what they say. Like, hey, doc.
Or if you're in that state of curiosity, like my 6-year-old with the moons, it was an inaccurate statement. There's a
Right,
difference between being inaccurate and then just being blatantly wrong and then
right.
doubling down on that and all. That's a whole nother, you know, we talk about ego and all that other stuff,
Yeah,
um, but it starts with that foundation,
right.
and there's, how, what you acknowledged earlier, what you started off your conversation, that challenging situation you had with your father. He was a byproduct of abuse, from his father and so on, and
Right.
maybe subconsciously he acknowledged it in a way and made him better from what he received, and then you, with that radical acceptance, kind of allowed you to normalize and process. Because what we need, what's so important with, I'll use my mnemonic, acknowledge to action, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is the opportunity to process, and process when we're given, when we find that source or that avenue or the opportunity to do that, so critical to be curious, to ask questions why, to understand it. It's not because I want to be right because that person's wrong or vice versa, but healthy processing, healthy curiosity helps us helps us go with that radical acceptance
Yeah.
and understand our process, and identify the sources we need to get better. Because there are very few things in life, especially when it comes to our makeup and there's not a rinse and repeat. Yeah, there's great models out there that we could tap into and utilize, but we have to find and make our own. And that's what's so great about your conversation.
Yeah.
I'm just, as I'm hearing you say this stuff, I'm like, yeah, I love how you said that. Radical acceptance and curiosity in the form of processing is so critical. Sometimes we have to work hard to get that access. Sometimes we got to bang down the door of access sometimes they're right there in front of us in clear sight.
Yeah, and like what I was saying about your son was that you've established that environment or that culture. I should say that's where like is a culture
Yeah.
that he's allowed to be inaccurate, right? Like
Yes. Yeah.
you don't punish him basically for being inaccurate. Whereas like a lot of the systems set up right now in society is like, hey, if you're inaccurate, or if I even think you're inaccurate, or if I want you to think a specific way, I'm going to beat you down to a level to where you're not allowed to ask that question, or you don't feel comfortable asking that question. So then you just fall in line and just do what you're told, right?
Yeah,
Like
it becomes a quiet and compliant
right,
sort of dynamic culture, which is a roadblock to
yeah,
creativity,
yeah,
and just really being our authentic selves,
yeah. And
our true
there's
selves.
and it's kind of interesting too. And this is actually I, there's this guy, and I forget his name, but he was commissioned to do a study, I think it was in the 60s by NASA, because NASA wanted to find out how to hire more geniuses, right? And the way this guy defined a genius was being able to use your own creativity to solve problems.
Mm.
And he found that at 5 years old, 98% of 5 year olds could be classified as a genius. By the time they're at 10, it was like, I think like 40 or 30 or 40%. And it just dramatically went down. And by the time they're, I think it was like 15, it's like 5% or less.
Yeah.
Something like that. Those numbers might be slightly off, but it was dramatic, right? And by the time you're an adult, that's like 2%, right? And he attributed it to schooling. Now, I think when you say schooling, it's kind of multifactor, right? It's public education, but it's also, like sometimes your church, it's your parents or your grandparents or the peers around you who are limited, via thinking and stuff. Or the media now is a huge part of schooling and education for us now is media, social media, all those things, right? Like you get hammered constantly with how bad everything is in life. And it's like, well, I mean, if you really look around, like, do you see it though? Like, do you see everybody completely miserable or getting treated badly all the time? Well, no, I
Hmm.
actually generally don't see that. So it's like, well, but you're told that so much that you start to believe it. And when you start actually internalizing that belief, you don't even question it again anymore because your curiosity now is gone. So now you have these like limiting beliefs that just keep stacking up that aren't actually your beliefs, but you think they are because somebody else, because you've been told it so many times. And you also no longer question things because you're told not to. Um, so then you just basically get to this point where it's like, you don't have any skills to deal with life. And that's kind of where I got to. Like I said, let's kind of draw back a little bit. Is that's kind of where I got to. The way I dealt with life was all physical. I'd go play sports. I'd go be rough with somebody. All those different things. You
Yeah.
get to a point where you get to let your frustration out in a physical mode, explode in some kind of like a kick in a ball or whatever, and like, again, you're doing it with somebody else. So typically they would knock you down and go, hey man, hey, you're getting a little too aggressive, right? Like, so you
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of find that
It kind
balance.
of balances.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
And you get that frustration out, maybe ending a good cry or something, you move on, you process it. It's done. It's no longer there holding down onto you. But when you don't, and I didn't have the physical capacity to do that, I didn't have the mental skills to do it. So getting this performance psychology stuff and the sports psychology stuff and the mental skills, I was actually able to process and deal with these things internally without the physical side. So now I have both capacities rather than just the one.
Yeah. That's really interesting because with our experiences and how we grow up and kind of we gravitate towards things. Most things, the path of least resistance in terms of
Yeah.
discovering who we are, right? And for some of us, that's physical, sports, and whether we know it or not, I don't know if this is the best way to describe it, but we become codependent on that sort of outlet.
Yeah.
That means the process. And that's okay. Like we all need something. We all need something. And ideally, we want it to be healthy. We want it to be the best it could be possibly for all parties involved, right? And sports, physical, all that stuff, that's great. But what happens, like you said, whether it's a life-changing things, and there's this complete pivot where it's a complete paradigm shift from what you're used to, whether it's forced or you internally make a decision, right? Well, then that's where the social, emotional. I've talked about this a few times in a couple episodes that I've done. MEPS, pretty much for everyone in the military,
Yeah.
it's like MEPS. It's this frustrating word, military entering processing station. Well, through doing podcasts and my own experiences, post-military maps. And that's what we need to do, whether we're veterans, all human beings, right? Mm-hmm. The well-being for our mental, emotional, physical, social, and one more, so it's a double S, spiritual. Yeah. And we all need that in our company. Sometimes we rely more on the physical part because we're young, growing up, and that's, we're literally growing by the day physically, and you need that outlet. But when that stops or things change, all right, where's my outlet to do the emotional piece? And it's never all or nothing in any of those capacities. Yeah. And I believe that to be a balanced way. And when we're aware of it and we accept that and we acknowledge that, and all these words, these action words we could put in, it sets us up. It sets us up to deal with those challenges that sometimes we don't see coming, that are unanticipated. And that's, I wanted to highlight that because whether it's a divine sort of energy, or I don't know. Here we are talking about that. How you found acknowledge action, how we're talking, we're obviously dialed in on that sort of energy. Mm-hmm. To be aware and understand the importance of all those outlets. So we could, more often than not, be the best we could be. And it's never always going to be all great. It's never going to be all doomsday either. A lot of it's somewhere in between on that bell curve, right? Yeah. And then some days are better than others, some days are not, but it's never usually all great, and it's never usually, like you said, like, if you just listen, if that input source was exclusively certain outlets on social media, you would think it would be the end of days, tomorrow, in some ways. And others, it's like they're dismissive of some realities, and it's like, you can't be dismissive. You can't overdo it. You can't underdo it. It's really hard. It's very, very difficult to find those sources and to find what work to attain and maintain a balance. Right.
Yeah, and I like the maps because it's the way I like to talk about it is you're thinking constantly, right? So like every action you do begins, delivers with, and ends with a thought, right? So like you think about going to do something, and then you go and you do it. While you're doing it, you're thinking about, is this effective? You're doing this right? Like, am I doing it right? All these different things. And then when you get done, you do like an after action review, almost like, what had happened? Should I have done this? Should I do it differently? All these different things. But how often do you work on that mental piece of it, building those mental skills? A lot of people don't put much effort into that. So then it's like, well, then those thoughts go completely untrained, right? So then they go off in the deep end, and you get, all this extra, we'll call it stress and anxiety and depression or whatever, which is just a series of habits because you don't have the mental skills. Yeah. Then you get emotional. People are telling, this is why I like to focus on guys, because, men have been told this whole time, like, by females, and again, I'm not trying to dismiss anybody, right? Like, but men and women process things differently. The way we show emotions and use internalize emotions or not, right? Like, it's different, and it's supposed to be different. That's the point of it, right? But we're told to show emotion more. Well, a strong, physical, capable man showing emotion is kind of dangerous. You actually don't want that. What you want to teach men is how they actually internalize it, because they internalize it not because they want to hide it or pretend it doesn't exist. You're internalizing it. You're processing it internally. That's what it really should mean to internalize it. You're processing it internally so you don't act out of it, because you don't want somebody who's strong, physically capable, especially in these like special operations guys, right? Like, they come out of the military and they're acting through their emotions. That's a dangerous person. You don't want that. Yes. Right. You want them to be able to process their emotions internally, not react with them, but understand them and then respond appropriately. Right.
You just nailed it. You nailed it. You want to respond. You don't want to react, unless it's a life-threatening, which that's very rare. I hope for a lot of people. Yeah, you're legitimately in a life-threatening situation. Then you have to react. But most situations prompt us to respond. And what you nailed it, Kevin, is just having that mental inventory and internalizing. So even if it's just like a pause, process, proceed, right? That's another thing. Just taking 3 seconds. It sounds corny. And for me, like, sometimes when I know when my nerves and whatever you want to call it get elevated, I start with my pinky, I go to my ring finger, middle finger, index, thumb, and I go back. And that's my that's just a technique I use to ground myself out. All right. I just go like that. And it does something, because another thing you said too, Kevin, the mind body, right? The mind body connect.
Yeah.
It's underrated. It doesn't get talked about as often as it could or should. And because it starts here, it's the classic ABCs: antecedent, behavior, consequence. Consequence meaning result, the byproduct, right? And what prompts you, what is your behavior, and then what is the result of that? And when we internalize that, like you said, I love how you said that. When we take time to internalize it, you're evaluating and assessing the antecedent to identify the appropriate behavior, or in some cases, the inappropriate behavior, and what was the result. And when you pick, like as an analyst, antecedent consequence, it's always identifying what that behavior is, whether it's a response or a reaction. Ideally, you want it to be a response. You're getting me all excited here with this talk here.
You can do that. That's a good thing. Like there's physical stuff you can do. That's a good one. Just a deep, if you could just take a couple breaths, 1 or 2 breaths, even, just kind of like I said, just putting some kind of a space between that. Like, because the thing, and this is what I'm saying, like processing that emotion. It's like a lot of people say like, oh, you got to be stoic, don't have any emotions. No, that's wrong. Men have emotions. We just don't outwardly show them typically. Right. And that's what you don't want that. That's not a good thing typically. And in fact, a lot of people think emotional intelligence means showing emotion all the time. It's like, no, that's actually the opposite. That's actually unintelligent emotion, because if you can't process it, right, and the only way you can process it is by acting it out, well, then there's no intelligence to that, right? The intelligence part is the understanding it and go, okay, how can I use it, right? Like, okay, I just felt anger. Well, why did I feel angry? Well, something bothered me. Well, what bothered me about that statement? Was there some truth to it? And is that what bothered me? Because there actually might be some truth to it. Or am I actually just angry because they're uninformed, and that makes me feel like I have to protect them now, or maybe they're going to cause harm to somebody else, right? Because of this thinking, being able to process that quickly and going like, okay, well, let me respond to this. Like, okay, I don't need to respond with anger necessarily. I just process and go, okay, I allowed it to make me angry. Let me understand that for a second and go, okay, well, let me respond and say, well, I don't think that's accurate, right? And now I can go through this, because your emotions are there for a reason that help you, right? Doesn't mean they're accurate. It means they're real. They happened. Doesn't mean they're accurate. So if I react with that inaccurate emotion or thought, right? Like now I'm just continuing that energy. But especially if I want to be a leader, which is what, especially the military guys, right? Like that's what we're kind of driven to, leadership for the most part, right? Like your energy is contagious. So if I allow my anger or that negative energy to continue to push forward, well, that's what everybody else is going to catch. But even if other people in the background are angry or have that negative energy, if I'm able to just hold it in, start responding, and calm things down, right? Like my energy now, even if it's not necessarily positive, like people think you got to go negative to positive. No, I just got to be neutral, right? Like if I can just get from negative to neutral, most people can handle that, right? That's not a big step to go, well, hey, I just stop thinking negative. I just get to neutral. Okay, well, let me get to that. And then we go from neutral to positive, potentially, right? But if I can
you ground out the situation. You just like,
So then the energy gets transferred and go, okay, So you got to work on that. But and just kind of go off with your spiritual one on the S2 real quick, because I always say mind, body, soul. And if you're not religious, it's spiritual isn't necessarily. I mean, it's just a higher something bigger than yourself, right? Like
it's beyond understanding. It's just there's something there.
And the thing is, like I say, mind, body, soul, because you're 3 parts, right? Like your body is just an outward image, right? Like people think, like, oh, your body's your body. No, I can change my body. I can, eat differently. My body's going to change. I can work out differently. My body's going to change, right? Like as you get older, your body changes, right? All these different things, your body's never the same. Well, then that means it's not you, right? Because it's constantly in flux and changing. There's so many outward things that modify it. Your mind, the subconscious, so to speak, it's one of its main purposes is to automate, but also to survive. It's just a survival, right? Like, so
Mm.
it'll set you into fight or flight. It'll set you in all different modes. It'll be the reactant if you don't control it and think about it, which means it's also not you, right? Like when your nervous system gets all wrecked up, that's your the subconscious, your monkey mind or whatever, your reptilian brain jumping in and taking over. You can override that. Well, if you can override that, that means it's not you also, right? So then you got that soul, whatever you want to consider your soul, but that's who you are, that you're kind of your actual thing, right? Because if for instance, if you say you're going to go, okay, I'm going to take a couple deep breaths. Can you notice your breath, right? Can you notice your thoughts? If you can pick apart your thoughts and either stop them, move them, change them, or just let them go flow through, that means you are not the thought. There's something else going on there. You're observing it. You're that piece of awareness from somewhere, right? Something. That's who you are. You're that kind of awareness itself, that soul, whatever it is. Now, do you have to know exactly what it is and be able to explain it perfectly? No. What you have to know, though, is then if I'm not my thoughts, I'm not necessarily my body, anything that's happening to my body now, any kind of ailment, things like that, which is actually what helped me, is you're pulling away from it. I am not depression. I am not anxiety. I am not this pain, that pain, whatever it is, whatever ailment that's going on. It's coexisting in this body. My mind, my soul, right? I can override that. I can start talking to my subconscious. My subconscious will do these background images and do these different things and start cleaning that up and start knocking it down, moving it, suppressing it, changing it, altering it, right? And then I can start eating right, giving my body the proper fuel, the proper movements, the proper, mechanical things that it needs to optimize. I can do those different things, but that's my soul making those decisions to optimize things that this other part of my existence can benefit from.
Wow, I love how you broke that down. Yeah, I'm that's something I'm gonna reflect on and
Yeah.
talk about processing. I need some time to. No, serious. That's a great perspective to say from a analyst perspective, how to compartmentalize those
Yeah.
three core those foundations, those three
Yeah.
core elements that make up arguably our foundation: the mind, body, soul.
Yeah.
And when you're able to take a step back and inventory, that sets you up to be a very responsive, good decision maker for you as an
Yeah.
individual. And as you were saying all that, you know that saying is like, oh, he's an old soul. You know how people
Yeah.
reference like this 15-year-old, oh, he's an
Yeah.
old soul, and it's like there's something to that because
Yeah.
they're in tune with probably almost to the T how you broke it down.
Yeah.
They know when the mind needs to be. Let's go to like a sport, like say hockey, a check. Sometimes you got to check that mind.
Yeah.
Sometimes you got to check the emotion, and the soul may be like the gatekeeper of that.
Yeah.
Of or the goaltender, not the goaltender. I don't know what the best. I don't want to identify a label. How did you apply those principles? So what you said, I can only imagine how you've come to terms on that and how you learned that, and how are you applying that to who you are now and in all aspects of your life, personally, professionally, all that stuff.
Yeah. So a big part of that was, again, identity is a big part of change, right? So like if you want to start making
Yeah.
habits, right? So if I identify as a poor person, right, and not to get into the crazy identity politics of what's going on now, but like
Yeah,
say
the
if I
social
want
economic, yeah.
to change my habits, right? If I keep telling myself I'm poor, I identify myself as being poor, I keep saying those things, right? My habits will inevitably align with somebody who's poor. I'm going to make choices and decisions that lead me down that life, and I'm not even going to understand it. So I'm going to believe that I am that thing, right? But if I say I'm rich, right? If I'm saying I'm wealthy, I'll start changing my habits to align with somebody who is rich, right? Same thing with the physical, the mental stuff, right? Like it's all habits. You're not anxious, right? You having a moment of an angst a moment of anxiety, right? Like anxiety is a symptom of something, and you may have a moment that is anxious, but you yourself are not anxiety. You are not anxious, right? You're experiencing this moment. And if you understand that and stop identifying as it, it will pass, right?
Mm.
If you say, I am, then you start finding more and more reasons to believe that. And then you'll start experiencing more and more of those moments. And then you'll focus solely on those moments. And then you'll think your whole life is made up of anxious moments, but it's not. There may be, like, even if you have 10 in a day, right? Well, how many moments do you have in a day? Thousands, right? Like, but if you only pay attention to those 10 and keep saying, I am this, you're only going to see those 10. So I stopped saying, I have this ailment, or I am this ailment, I am, I, whatever, like some patient of whatever, right? And started saying, hey, this thing's coexisting in my body. If that's the case, well, how can I optimize my body? Well, my body, if I want it to run like a Ferrari, or a Porsche, right? I'm not going to go and get 87 octane fuel and put it in there.
Yeah.
I need that 93 premium, So I'm going to stop buying this lower quality food, even if I can't afford as much, which, by the way, is somewhat of a myth if you actually buy it yourself. Because if you go to fast food, it's like $12 now by itself, right? Like, you can go
Yeah.
get a whole pound of, healthier quality food for less than that. You just have to learn how to make things yourself.
And it takes more effort, and it's not as quote unquote convenient.
Right.
Um,
Uh, but if I
yeah.
if I don't want to run like a hoopty, right? Like, I don't want to put hoopty fuel in my body. I want to
I
put
like
that
the
I want to put that premium fuel in there because I
I
want
haven't
this to
heard
be a
that in a
Porsche.
while. Hoopty. That's a great
Yeah.
word. Hoopty.
So I want this Porsche running, right? So I have to put that premium
Yeah.
fuel in there. So I have to think about that. And then I have to move my body, right? Like, one thing doctors tell you too, which is, again, this is, and I'm not shit on doctors necessarily, but a lot of them don't necessarily know as much about the human body as people think they do. They learn
Hmm.
about medicine. They don't learn about human anatomy necessarily as much.
Yeah.
They tell you if you get injured, right, like to stop moving something. Well, when you stop moving it, it causes further problems because the pain is usually at the end point. But if you stop moving it, the end point gets smaller and smaller and shorter, which means then you start getting less and less mobility in that joint, which causes even more problems. Because once one joint starts to get immobile, another one takes up the space somewhere else and tries to let your body move like it's supposed to as efficiently as possible, which then causes other problems because those joints aren't supposed to move that way. So the more you hamper yourself that way, the further problems that happen. So you have to learn how to push past those points and understand that the end limit is the pain. And if you get to the pain and just back off just a little bit and find a way to stay in that motion a little bit longer, and then eventually the end point moves and you can actually get more movement in the joint, which is how your body's meant to move. I control that through my mind by understanding that and going, okay, my body is experiencing this pain because it's at a limit somewhere. So if I can control my thoughts and my mind to not allow myself to stop there and go, okay, now I'm gonna observe this and go, is this worse than it's been ever? If the answer is no, then I know I haven't made it worse, so I can stay there, right? I can keep
Hmm.
going, and eventually it moves in the positive direction. But if I get to a point where I'm going like, well, it's not worse, but let me back off because it hurts. Well, then I've just now limited my capacity, and then eventually that builds and then goes further and further down. So I use my soul, so to speak, to be able to then go, okay, well, let me observe that my body's experiencing that pain, but I want to be able to have it do this thing eventually. So I have to be able to overcome that thought and that sensation and just continue to move past it. So that's kind of how I ended up helping myself. Was, again, I knew I had all this nervous system issues. My body, my mind, my reptilian mind wanted to save me from all this pain,
Hmm.
but it had gained all these tactics to when it thought we were dying. Because I thought I was dying at one point, like, which I kind of was actually, but it's basically prevented me from doing almost everything. So I had to override that system by consciously talking to myself and saying like, "No, you're not dying. It's not worse than it's ever been. So therefore, you can continue that." Now you don't want to go 0 to 100, right? Like you want to get to that uncomfortable level where it's like, okay, I'm at that point. Let me hover there for a minute, and then eventually that becomes common or normal to you, and then you just continue to move from there. But it's a step process, and you just have to be able to like override that by that conscious thought of saying, once it kicks in, disassociate from it, say that I'm not that. Let me actually get out of that survival state, which is the subconscious mind, and let me get into the thought state so I can make a decision and respond rather than letting my body react. Let me decide to continue this.
That's good. And so going back to the word acknowledge, when you acknowledge, you accept, and then you process. Acknowledge, accept, process is so important, just like the mind, body, soul recognition. Because if we don't challenge ourselves to do that, and we don't make that conscious effort to challenge ourselves and do the uncomfortable and get in our own world and just kind of wrestle with ourselves internally, it could perpetuate what the source of the issue is that is causing all these challenges, right? Like these challenges that could be managed better, could be mitigated. When you were talking about like rich, poor, I imagine for a lot of people, the first thing you hear the metric is money, right? Again, I'm generalizing. I'm making an assumption here, right? It's actually my internal assumption. For so many years, it's but, oh, you're rich, you got money. You're poor, you don't. Well, I think rich and poor is more about the true wealth is, do I want to be rich? Let's just stick with that word, emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually. And then that metric that is like a bank account, right? Then that could follow. If that's how you define rich, so be it. Hey, that's your thing. But I think really true wealth, and I know there's a lot of parables out there. There's so many great quotes. But like when you have your health is wealth. And from there, you could fill in then what does it mean to be rich, right? Wealthy and rich and all that stuff. That's just something I was thinking when you're saying that. I'm like, this goes beyond the dollar bill.
Yeah.
That we need that to function in today's society, right? All this stuff, right? It gives us, it does create opportunity. Don't get me wrong. I'm not, and you need that as a means to advance our access points to get better. But it absolutely starts with the mind, body, soul connect. And when we're dialed in and calibrated, that's half the battle. A well-defined problem is half solved. And when we're equipped and we challenge ourselves to identify what the problem is, then we can get to work in ways, and we reach out to other people. That's what I think coaching is so important. Using these resources in a balanced, structured, healthy way. To ask those questions, going back to what we were saying earlier, to ask the questions, to be curious, to all these things, to go back to our genius state when we were 5. When like you said, like when 98% of us were in that creative mode, we could go back to that. We could tap into it. It's there. It doesn't go away. It just gets internalized. It gets buried under layers and layers and layers. I go on and on. All right, I think I made my point. But layers of social dynamic and upbringing, whether it's direct form of abuse, neglect, or not having access points to really get dialed in and know how to use that tool and say, that's awesome. Go with it. Or, hey, this is how you could do it better.
Yeah, I like to talk about this. I've said this a couple times in my daily videos. Is the statue of David by Michelangelo? Yeah. So it I think it was commissioned 2 or 3 times before he actually did it, and people started it and they didn't, they weren't able to work with it. Apparently it was just a not really good piece of marble or whatever, like people just didn't like it for whatever reason and just stayed out there. And he finally was commissioned to do it, and he thought of something different. But they asked him how he was able to pull that statue out of the marble, and he said, I didn't. It was always in the marble. I just chipped away all the stuff that to reveal it. And I think us as human beings are that way, right? Like you're born to be a genius. You have that in you. Like everybody does, really, with very few exceptions, right? Like people who are born with like severe disabilities, things like that. Like, not that some of them can't be, depending on the disability, but you know what I mean. Like there's obviously some things. But very few people, I think, fall in that realm. What happens is over the years, you get dumped on, you get shit on, you get all the, like you said, these layers and layers of all these people telling you what you can't do, what you're not going to be capable of, and all these different things. And you just start, again, believing it. So you have all these limiting belief systems that aren't really yours, that are just stacked on you. And somebody, like you said, a good coach, like, can start knocking those away and going like, and start questioning them, going like, well, I know you just said that, but why do you believe that? Can you find a reason that that's not true? And then as you start going, they're like, yeah, actually, I can find 50 reasons that's not true. But then why do you believe it? Like, why do you continue to perpetuate it then when you know there's examples over here that show how false it really is? So now we can just change it. We can change that, alter that habit, because everything's about habits and patterns, right? Like you're not broken. You just have this series of patterns and habits that you've established to lead to those disastrous moments. Whether you're doing it intentionally or not, right? That's a different story. Most of the time, it's just on the subconscious level. You're just like making these things because, again, you're convinced that it's going to happen. So you actually start making incremental changes along the way that you're not even conscious of, that ends up making it a disaster. But once you bring awareness to it, then I can go, well, now I have a choice. I can continue down that path, or I can decide different, and then it's going to end up diverging. And it looks like you did something magical, but you just chose a different path. Like you just chose to react, to respond rather than react.
That's great. I'm thinking a lot right now. But I kind of want to kind of. You mentioned your daily talks because I talking about access points and getting connected and tapping into we're called energy, forms of energy. So everyone listening to this and all that, how can they get connected with you, Kevin? Like what are some ways they could stay engaged? The internet's just like the vast thing. Yeah. I want to make sure that is available, and so we could stay connected as well.
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. As kind of Kevin Brewer. So I post on there, but I also spend most of my time on Instagram. So at Coach Kevin Brewer.
Okay,
that's where I post my most of my stuff. So yeah.
Oh, that's great. Talking about patterns and consistency, I usually ask two questions, and the open-ended one, and that just kind of gets the ball rolling for our conversation. And then, there's two more questions, but the one prior to the fun one is, what advice do you have? Because everyone to this date, I say, has been a veteran, has been a military service member, because that's just my network. I'm a byproduct of that, so it's been easy for me to identify with that and highlight, and there's so much value and intangible in our population, our veteran population, because it's such a diverse population, right? So, but what I'm saying here, whoever's not a military veteran, you don't have to be to understand and connect with what we just talked. We're talking about human stuff. This is everyday stuff, regardless of nationality, regardless if you're in the military or not, and so gender, all that. It's like, hey, how can I apply this? So much good things were talked about, some good highlight points. What advice do you have for that person, wherever they're at on their journey, whatever they're struggling with, whatever roadblock, whatever challenge they're dealing with? What advice do you have for them?
A couple of things. First is the power of yet, right? Y-E-T, a simple word, 3 letters. It's not very big. It seems like insignificant, but if you apply it to the end of any sentence, right, like you can alter that sentence dramatically. So you can say, I'm not, we'll just use again, wealthy, right? Like I'm not rich yet, right? I'm not where I want to be yet. I'm not this yet. Whatever the case is, fill in the blank, right? So I can just say yet at everything because I'm building towards it, right? Of course, you're not there yet. That's okay. You don't have to be. You're building towards it. Start making decisions now to start getting there. But if you don't ever think that you're capable of it, you'll never start even trying. So when you apply that word yet to things, you start getting this sense of, well, actually, maybe I can. And then you start building towards that. And you start making decisions and choices and actions towards that thing. Because now you start to think it's possible, right? So the power of yet. Anything you have, you ever want to say, you start doubting yourself, just say, well, yet. I'm not there yet. I'm not this yet. I'm not whatever, So that's one. Another one I like to talk about is A lot of people say comparison is a thief of joy. I actually disagree with that wholeheartedly. It's what you're comparing to is the problem, right? So
Mm,
if I want to be a millionaire, right? If I compare myself to a person who already has $1 million, yes, I'm going to steal my joy because I'm like, well, I can't go from $100 to $1 million in 5 seconds, of course. What I need to compare to is like, where was that guy when he was at my level? What did he do then to get to a
wow,
thousand?
that's
Go from 100 to a
yeah,
thousand, and then 1,000 to 10,000, 10,000 to 100,000, right? Like, I need to compare to that so I can learn what he did or didn't do, or she, whatever, right? Like, uh, and then start applying decisions and choices to that, and go, okay, well, if I just build, I can get to that millionaire status, whatever it is, right? And I'm just using that because it's easy comparison for money, but
yeah.
you can use that for anything, right? Like any kind of success, sports figures, whatever. Like, yeah, if I take a high school athlete, compare myself to an NBA player, right? Of course, I'm not going to be that. But what did he do when he got to senior year? What did he do when he got to his freshman college year, whatever it is, right? Like the D League. What did he do then, or she do then? Let me start doing those decisions, right? And making choices along that path, because then eventually I get something close to that. And again, I don't have to be exactly what they do. I just have to see what their habits are, not exact movements and patterns and things. What are their habits? Did they work out every day? Did they do this? Did they take care of their body? What did they do to get to that level? And then apply my own spin to it to be able to be at me within that comparison. So because I think that's a disservice when you actually never compare. Even if you compare yourself to your yesterday, right? That's still a comparison. Are you stealing joy from yourself? No. You're
But
bringing it's bringing joy because now I have hope for the future because I have a level to apply something to.
that's taking it to a physical thing too. Say like weightlifting, like, whether you're male, female, whatever. It's like, oh, I want to be, 225 benching is like
Yeah.
like especially for guys. Like, all right, you have 2 plates on. That's a game changer for
Yeah.
like whether you're a teenager to
It's
a
a
full grown
status,
adult.
a status
Yeah, it's
symbol,
a
isn't
status.
it?
And you can't go from, say, just bench pressing 150 pounds to 225 overnight.
Right.
You have, like you said, you can't compare yourself to somebody who's been putting in the work for years.
Right.
That's awesome how you said that. Is put yourself where that person was at when they acknowledged that they set that goal for themselves.
Yeah.
We've all experienced that. I don't want to be. There are few people in this world who have this crazy, rare, freakish strength, and the first time they're ever like. But again, that's such a small percentage of people. The most have to put in that work to hit that 225. And then, all right, I did 225 once or twice, clean. Now I want to hit double digits, right? More work. That's a way for. And then what happens? You just build 285 is another like big
Yeah.
you know, however it is, I like how you said break it down. You go into the project management world, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time
Yeah.
oriented. I think when we apply that to ourselves, emotional, well, whatever goal we set for ourselves, whether it's
Mhm.
a financial goal, a physical goal, heck, you could say, I want to be more. Or sometimes we have to identify what we don't want to be. I don't want to be angry. I don't want to be. And then that's a paradigm shift of that helps you identify what you want to be. And the last thing I want to just say and share is acknowledge comes from me being a C-130 loadmaster, and it's an operational world. Acknowledge loadmaster, right? Every time we open a checklist, it's a crew thing. Acknowledge. That was just a word to me
Yeah.
just years ago, right? It's now become, it's a word I think about daily. What you said yet, I said, YET, I'm not there yet, or yet, implied in all these contexts. Another powerful phrase that I got from the C-130 operational world is in progress. So
Mhm.
if I'm doing something in the back of a C-130 aircraft and it's taking me a little bit longer and everyone else has done their part of their checklist, if they prompt on the headset, I say in progress loadmaster. Thanks, load. And then you say complete loadmaster, right?
Mhm.
When you hit that objective and you close out your responsibilities and your duties, responsibilities, complete loadmaster. Slow down checks, complete loadmaster. Boom. That tells the whole crew, it tells yourself, all that. So yet, in progress, acknowledge, radical acceptance. I mean, there's a lot of correlation here with
Mhm.
words and really make it your own. How you say, whatever what you're saying, Kevin, what I'm saying, it's like, all right, take it and people make it your own and set those goals. That's great advice. That's awesome, because that's what this is all about.
Yeah.
Just an access point and all that too. So
I want to add real quick too. You said,
yeah,
you kind of a little hyperbole there, but you said you don't want to act out of anger or whatever. One thing I want to note is there is no negative emotion. There's only negative connotation to an emotion. Is
yeah.
every emotion you have, whether anxiety, anger, fear, whatever, doubt, it's all useful for something. So
It's there for a reason.
right. It's
Yeah.
better. It's not. You don't want to. You know, it's for me. It's all about terminology, the way we say things, right? Because that's how we start identifying or associating, right? It's like I don't want to act out of anger. Rather, I don't want to act. Be angry. Well, anger itself, having that emotion, might be useful, but I don't want to
It's
act.
necessary.
I don't want
in
to
some
act
yeah.
out of it, right? Like I don't want to use it to be my default. Might be a better way of saying that. So just for,
I like that.
Not that you were using that, but I'm saying like in case anybody else thinks that, because
No, I appreciate you adding clarity to that. And it goes back to what we said earlier, but I don't know what the timestamp was, but you don't want to act like you just said or react angrily. You want to you want to use it as a tool to, because anger's energy. Like anger, we could get into the whole Incredible Hulk thing, and I love the Incredible Hulk. Like, and it's like you learn it, and I hope one day Marvel just nails a movie with it. They have yet to do that, but so. Hopefully, hey, Disney, if you're listening, Marvel, you're listening to this podcast, get on it with the Hulk. But all seriousness, though, use it as a variable to the equation. Anger is a necessary variable, and if it's there for a reason.
Yep.
Acknowledge it, accept it, use it.
Yeah.
You use it. Thank you for that. Thank you for, because sometimes we get in our.
Because that kind of goes into the limiting beliefs. Like we hear these things and we start thinking that way, and then we don't ever question how we came across it. So like that's why I always try to I catch myself doing it too. So it's not, I'm just calling you out, as I do it sometimes.
No, that's okay.
I need to change the way I word that, because we don't ever get to that point, and that's how we get those limiting beliefs that keep stacking up. And I know, talking with you, I know you don't believe that, but other people do, and that's why I always try to bring it up and catch myself or other people saying it, so we can point out and go see, that's what we're talking about. Those moments where we say these things, we all do it.
Yeah. Oh,
and it's because it's just by nature the language we've used growing up, and if we can catch ourselves, that's important, because then we can alter it, at least the thought.
I appreciate that. Like just really just being in the moment and challenging ourselves internally and being good to ourselves. And I'll say it. I'm just gonna say, being nice to ourselves, and it's so important, and respectful to ourselves, because when we do that, we're better versions of ourselves. Yeah. So when we're in a challenging situation, whether it's socially, whether it's a friend or family member, coworker, fill in the blank, right? We're equipped to be in the moment and have an exchange. There's another A word that has a negative connotation, is argument, right? But if we pull back the layers, in the world of rhetoric, philosophy, law, argument is a good thing. It's an exchange of ideas. Because there's one thing I'll say, statement that kind of gets me, is agree to disagree. It's all right, you're putting up barriers right off the top. We can agree to, but I think there's a better way. And I know it's probably not you're wrong, I'm right, or vice versa. But having arguments can be a good thing when we respond and are in the moment with it, and we use honesty, respect, and intent. We could get through anything and everything. And it goes back to that. I think generally people just want to help each other out and all that.
I talk about this a lot at work lately too with a lot of people. Is I think conflict necessary for a good relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If used properly, right? If you never resolve anything and all you do is fight, right? Then obviously that's not good. That's not healthy. But if you and I can't have, say if we're working together, if we never have differing opinions and we don't have that conflict and then resolve it and come to some kind of a conclusion or a solution, one of us is being inauthentic, right? And we cannot have a good relationship unless we're both being authentic.
Yeah.
So it's mandatory to have that conflict. And some of the best relationships I've ever had, working relationships especially, came after some big ass argument. You know?
Yeah,
And it's
you're
like
right. It's like,
you resolve it together, and you go, okay, now I know how to, now we can get together, because now we know we can be truthful with each other and get to an actual result.
that's a great point, because internally, if it's unresolved, because one, that never had, that release point never happened, whether it was an exchange or a series of reactions, right?
Yeah.
That prompted to, like, all right, to create like a meeting point to agree to disagree. No, but to have that point to, like, whoa, man, it puts a different level of perspective, both from the self and from the person involved. And you're absolutely right. It's like, it gets on the path of attaining and maintaining that balance. And balance, it's, I know it's cliche, but balance is so key and critical, but it takes a lot of work. Just because you get there doesn't mean it's going to stay there. It's routine maintenance, daily maintenance, all that stuff. Whether it's putting 93 octane fuel in, like you said, hoopty's not a balanced thing. Like, you want that high performance vehicle that does a lot of good. It's a lot of work.
Yeah. And I think that agree to disagree people, maybe they're just trying to get to a point where, like, they feel like they have to have something resolved, and that's the only resolution. It's like, well, no, we can actually just disagree. Like, we don't actually have to agree on anything. We can actually just disagree, and that by itself was okay.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Oh, that's great. Hey, Kevin, this has been great.
Yeah.
This sets us up for I've been talking about it, and I just need to do it. Talking about just thoughts into actions is, I don't know if I'm going to call it all call, but just having, like, whether it's once a month, but just having an open all call, and everyone I've interviewed to date will always have that access and that invite, but just really having a informal access point to meet and just talk, whether it's anything on the MEPS, post-military MEPS. You just put it out there, and then boom, we'll talk about it. This is a great starting point for us. It's a great access point for all those who are going to listen to this, whether it's in the immediate future from production or down the road, right? I appreciate you trusting me, sharing your insight, sharing that great advice you did. That was pretty cool. I really appreciate that, and I really had a good time with this conversation today.
Yeah, me too. And I appreciate you letting me push back. I like doing that. It's like, it keeps it real, honest, and fun. If we can push at each other a little bit.
No, for sure. No, that was good. That was one of my favorite questions to conclude everything is what song do you want to dedicate to the Acknowledge to Action podcast? It's a great playlist that just gets better with every dedicated song. What song would you like to dedicate to it?
Oh, man. Hold on. Let me. Bad Days by AJR.
Okay. 100 Bad Days by
AJR.
AJR.
Yeah.
Perfect. It takes me a little bit of work to remember the newer artists and stuff like that. So
yeah, I'm with you. I'm terrible at remembering like names and things like that. Okay.
Yeah, Kevin. Hey, thanks again. This has been awesome. This has been great. I appreciate this conversation. I look forward to staying connected. I will include in the description of this episode, I'll put links that you provide me, so if people want to reach out to you, they could access those links. Okay.
Sounds good. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, Kevin, hey, take care. Appreciate you, and we'll look forward to staying connected with you.
Yeah, sounds good, man. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to episode 24 of the Acknowledge to Action podcast. Today, we explored Kevin Brewer's incredible journey from military service to personal growth, highlighting his challenges with health issues and the transformative power of radical acceptance. Kevin shared how his military background shaped his leadership style, the importance of asking the right questions, and the mental resilience required to navigate life's toughest moments. We also delved into the mind-body connection, emotional intelligence, and the role of curiosity, self-discovery, and problem-solving. This conversation was packed with powerful insights on redefining wealth, transforming limiting beliefs, and using emotions as tools for growth. Kevin's story reminds us that true wealth includes emotional, mental, physical, spiritual, and social well-being. And that balance, self-reflection, and curiosity are keys to personal transformation. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast for more inspiring stories and insights. Wherever you are in your journey, you are not alone. Know the journey doesn't end here. Keep pushing forward, believe in yourself, and encourage one another, and always strive to build strong, authentic relationships. Until next time, stay safe, be well, and keep moving forward with the power of acknowledged action. This is the Acknowledged Action Podcast.